Good afternoon. I'm Molly Young from the Miami University Alumni Association. As part of the Alumni Association's webinar series and in partnership with the Richard and Carol Cox Art Museum, today we present Escaping Nature, the Art of Environmental Awareness. Joining us for today's webinar is Dr. Orrin H. Pilkey, the James B. Duke Emeritus Professor of Geology at Duke University, and Mary Edna Fraser, an environmental activist artist. Also joining us for this first part of the webinar to get us started is Jason Shaman, Curator of Exhibitions at the Richard and Carol Cox Art Museum, and he's here to tell us a little bit about the museum's current exhibition, The World in Which We Live, and how it relates to the work that Dr. Pilkey and Mary Edna are doing together. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being here. As a reminder to our live viewers, you can submit a question during the webinar by clicking the Ask a Question button under your video. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason to get us started. And thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Molly and Orrin and Mary Edna. It's wonderful to have you here. It's fantastic to see you after many years. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is really a special opportunity to really learn about the marriage between art and science in an effort to address environmental issues. So the current exhibition at the Richard and Carol Cox Art Museum at Miami University, The World in Which We Live, is about the art of environmental awareness. And the exhibition runs through early December, so it runs through the full semester. I said December. I'm forgetting what time of the year this is. Running through Alumni Weekend in June here at Miami University. I'll just kind of give you a little background. The inspiration actually for the exhibition is Mary Edna and Orrin. And the work that they had done previously, I had worked with them in South Carolina, and inspired me to eventually develop this exhibition that includes Mary Edna's batiks and includes the importance of Orrin Pilkey's research. So really excited to hear. I did want to, real quickly though, I wanted to thank a few people that were very instrumental in helping us with the exhibition and the programming. I'd like to thank Dr. Amy Bergerson, who is the Associate Provost and Dean for Undergraduate Education, and is also the Director of Miami University's Focus Program. And the current Focus Program at Miami is Environmental Justice, which is being led by the Institute for the Environment and Sustainability. So special thanks to Dr. Jonathan Levy, who is the director of that program and is associate professor in geology and environmental earth science. And special funding that supported all of this comes from the Miami University, from the Elizabeth W. Henderson Charitable Foundation, the Miriam W. Howard Art Museum Fund, and the local Three Valley Conservation Trust. So really excited and grateful for everyone who contributed. And now to turn things over to Orrin and Mary Edna.
So, Orrin, you get to tell your quote.
Okay, let me start with this quote from the United Nations Secretary General. I think it sets the whole stage of where we stand in the global climate change problem. He says, greenhouse gas emissions keep growing, global temperatures keep rising, and our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator. That's from the UN Secretary General. That says in so many words that we have not been making progress in reducing emissions of carbon dioxide.
So
And I'll
what
let
you
you.
see on the screen is Pilkey's new book, Escaping Nature, How to Survive Global Climate Change. And it is a wonderful book. You should get it if you have a chance. And you do.
That book, and this is the other book that she just showed is an earlier one on global climate change that is way out of date because this is a very fast moving process event in nature. In our book, we divide it all up into earth, air, fire, and water, and how global climate change is working in those places. And we also have, in each case, we try to give some advice on what you can do about um, uh, global climate change that's impacting on you. And there are many things that, for just as one example, we have found that when people use wood chips or straw along the edge of their house, along the foundation, that turns out to be a big fire hazard that we haven't worried about in the past because the fire isn't as frequent and as widespread now because of global climate change. And so I would argue that I would hope that those of you who are concerned with your own property, wherever you are, there are things about what we can do to help to make our house safer. Mary Edna, you go ahead with that. This is the second book, the older book.
Yes.
It was done with me and my son Keith Pilkey. It was a lot of fun to be writing a book with my children.
So Pilkey and I began working together in 1993, and that was with the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum exhibition, Aerial Inspirations. And this was produced by Duke University Press. And the pieces we're going to show you are from that book.
Yeah, this first one is Mauna Loa, the mountain in Hawaii, which is of great importance to the study of and keeping track of global climate change because they are measuring carbon dioxide content of the air, and they've been doing it for a couple of decades. It started out, CO2 was 319 parts per million, and now it's 420 parts per million. It's going up. And the more the carbon dioxide, the greater are the changes in global climate change.
Slopes of Mauna Loa, Hawaii is 184 inches by 36 inches. This batik on silk is made from Landsat images, and it reveals the diversity of Earth's landforms and how science of remote sensing can capture inaccessible scenes. The dark lava flows down the slopes, and the rich red vegetation grows on the island.
Marietta, you go first on this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wilson's Promontory, Australia, is 27 inches by 35 inches, and it's the southernmost point of the Australian mainland, and it contains the largest coastal wilderness area in Victoria. And this is one of 400 fires that recorded on the 7th of February, known as Black Saturday, and it burned out of control 50% of the national park.
Fire has been a major impact of global climate change. Everybody, I think, knows about the California fires where 2 towns were burned. We had huge fires in Greece and of course in Australia and Canada. In Canada, the area of that has been burned is equivalent to the size of the state of North Carolina. What's happening? The preceding the fires is a period of hot and dry climate, and that makes the fire potential much higher, and that's why it's getting why we're getting so many fires in all parts of the world.
This is the Murray River in Australia, and it's 31 inches by 28 inches. And I took a flight over the barren land, and it's supposed to be the largest river, but it's barely a trickle.
This is a very common problem too. Of course, it goes both ways. Sometimes the rivers have increased the volume and have been flooding, been a lot of flooding from rivers. But in other cases, particularly in the southwestern United States, we have the problem of drying rivers and drying lakes behind dams, all of which impacts on water supply in cities of Southern California, Las Vegas, and so forth. It's becoming a bigger problem.
Hurricane Katrina is 51 inches by 54 inches, and it was a Category 4 storm when it made landfall, as the levee system built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers catastrophically failed.
Katrina was an entirely unexpected storm. It had a 30-foot storm surge. In other words, a wave 30 feet high came rushing in. And imagine what that does. I know all about it because my parents' house, which had already been damaged by Hurricane Camille a few years earlier, my parents' house was completely destroyed. In fact, it was removed. They were no longer living in it, but that made it a pretty personal thing. The reason that the storm surge was so high is because the continental shelf is very shallow and very gently sloping. Under those circumstances, you get big storm surges. And off the outer banks of North Carolina, where the continental shelf is steeper, these storm surges are quite a bit smaller.
Gulf oil spill is 55 inches by 35 inches. And during 11 flights conducted in May at the request of NOAA, NASA's airborne imaging system extensively mapped this. The little white things are boats that are trying to clean up the mess.
That oil spill did a lot of created a lot of damage on the shoreline. In fact, because there are bigger storm surges from the ocean with climate change. When the vegetation along the shoreline, like mangroves, has been destroyed, that means the damage of these waves is more than it would have been without the oil spill.
Iceberg is 77 inches by 45 inches, and it's an artistic rendering from a digital photograph by Ralph Clevenger on the faculty at Brooks Institute. The portion above the water depicts the Antarctic iceberg, weighing approximately 300 million tons, and the underwater is a shot from the water in Alaska flipped upside down.
Now, these icebergs are melting rather rapidly right now due to the warming ocean. And they are in part a source of sea level rise. The warming ocean itself is a major part of sea level rise. As water expands, as water warms, it expands. And the melting of ice, mainly ice sheets on land, and some mountain glaciers, all of that is contributing to the ocean sea level rise, a rise that we think in the next century may reach as high as 20 feet.
I wanted to speak about what batik is. It's an ancient method of dyeing silk that began before written language. So you use hot wax and dyes. The wax is applied to the white cloth first, dyed, waxed, dyed, and that resist method creates an image. The ice sheet at the North Pole is global perception, and it is a huge piece. It's Buckminster Fuller's projection Dymaxum map from 1930, the first flat map of the entire surface of the Earth, as it reveals our planet as one island, one ocean.
That ice, although it looks rather small in this batik, that's the source of, that's in large part, that's Greenland, and that's the source of sea level rise for sure. Probably of the order, if the whole thing, if all of Greenland melted tomorrow, it would raise the sea level by 20 feet, something like that. So it's so important to the future of the world. The what's happening to ice. Not only here, the ice shown here, but then the ice in Antarctica is, and there is a glacier called the Thwaites Glacier, which has just been studied in recent years, and it's going to produce, it's a glacier that has the same area as the state of Florida, and it is going to raise sea level 10 feet when it melts.
When is that expected that it'll melt?
That's a good question. That's the question facing us all, but it'll probably be in a century or two when it's finally gone. When all the ice in the world melts, both the ice sheets in Greenland and West Antarctica, plus the mountain glaciers, sea level is going to rise 195 feet. Imagine 195 feet.
Oh my. This is a Mulan in Greenland. And the famous photograph inspiring this Mulan is credited to Roger Braithwaite at the University of Manchester. The almost vertical plunge shows millions of gallons of water cascading to bedrock, and that heats up the ice above it and makes it float away.
That water that you see coming down is eventually going to make it to the ocean. That's a melting glacier, and in the immediate future of that water, it's lubricating the base of the glacier, making it move all the faster toward the ocean. So that's a pretty important event that we're looking at right there.
Bhutan's Himalayas is 37 inches by 54 inches. And in July of 2008, I was demonstrating batik on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. for NASA at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival. The tiny Asian nation of Bhutan was also featured. And I penciled onto silk a satellite image taken on November the 20th, 2001, that was used to study glaciers. Bhutanese in their indigenous dress love seeing their home become art.
The glaciers that you see here, these are mountain glaciers, and these glaciers are a major source of drinking water for a good part of the world, both for northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. And in many cases, the water source is disappearing as the ice goes away. So it's a serious proposition. The melting of the ice on mountains is damaging the water supply, and and at the same time, it's helping to raise the sea level. If all the mountain glaciers of the world like these melted, we would raise sea level 1 foot. To give you an idea of what a 1, 2, 3 foot sea level rise would be, it's estimated that a 2 to 3 foot sea level rise will end all barrier island development in the world. And that with that much of a raise, every time there's a storm on most barrier islands, it would be they'd be overwashed with water and sand, and if people are living there, can't escape, just like the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So this, what we're seeing here is a very important event in a global sense.
The Bhutanese are already moving their people from these areas because the water source is drying up. So small nation, but smart leadership. Charleston airborne flooded is 57 inches by 35 inches. Matt Pendleton, a spatial analysis with a group working with NOAA Coastal Services in Charleston, prepared a map that shows a projected rise in sea level of 4.6 feet by the year 2100. And this batik illustrates a mid-range projection. Flooding in the present-day shoreline of my home city. My city floods where you cannot drive cars 45 days a year presently.
Yeah, Charleston is a city in trouble, no question about it. Very historic city, and recently a ship, an ocean liner that starts out in Charleston and brings several hundred people to the Bahamas. They came back, and while they had been gone, there'd been a storm, not a big one, but a significant one, and it had gone over the seawall and had flooded the parking lot where all the passengers had parked their cars. Many of the cars were totaled from this, and that's what's going to happen to a lot of that kind of event is going to be seen more and more as sea levels rise.
Northwest Passage is 38 inches by 54 inches. In the summer of 2007, NASA's Aqua satellite imagery indicated that the sea ice was retreating to a sufficient extent to change the character of the Northwest Passage. Amid the Canadian Arctic archipelago, the waterways connecting the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans collate here like an old world map in this batik.
The Northwest Passage is something that sailors have been looking forward to having for many decades, for many years. It is a new way to get to Asia, basically. Instead of going all the way around to the Panama Canal, or even in some cases all the way around the tip of South America. So it's going to make a big deal where you don't have to go all the way down to the Panama Canal if you're going to Asia.
Boston is 43 inches by 99 inches, and using my artistic license, I just removed all the human development in the foreground, bringing the harbor back to its more natural state. Each city has an individualized dynamic skyline as well as shoreline that will be affected by climate change.
Boston is in particular hazard because the whole downtown area of the city is very low elevation. The whole downtown area is built on fill that was pumped out of or dredged out of the nearby Boston Harbor, and at that time they also added a lot of garbage from the city to increase the volume. But because of that low elevation, the city will have to be protected by seawall. But even so, seawalls are always sooner or later over top when the big one comes, the big one, the biggest storm of that decade or so.
Eddingsville Beach, South Carolina. I was flying in my family's 1946 Air Coupe with my brother as pilot, and a Nikon film camera took this image. And Orrin recognized this as the beach of the formal Eddingsville location and requested the art from the photograph. I would consider this my aerial backyard.
Eddingsville Beach is Eddingsville, the city, the town, quite unusual along the east coast of the U.S. Most of the town is now sitting offshore in pieces, so to speak. It was completely destroyed by the 1893 hurricane, and now most of it is in the ocean. It's an interesting place to get to. You can wade across that inlet knee deep as a rule. At least it was a few years ago. And on the beach, you can see a little pieces of pottery and pieces of things that show that there was a civilization there at one time, but it's all gone.
Now, Pilkey, they have McMansions there. They built a whole McMansion development. It'll get washed away. Shishmaref Shores in Alaska is taken from a high elevation black and white photograph, which I rotated 180 degrees as if flying toward the mainland. The barrier islands become totemic canoes sailing through dark waters.
These islands, the one in the middle there is Shishmaref, and it has maybe 400 people that live there, 400 Eskimos. It is eroding. Until about 20 years ago, it was quite stable. It was not eroding because sea ice was up against the island beaches, and not only was sea ice cramming up against the beaches, but the beach was mainly permafrost. And now the permafrost is melting, so the beach is now, and the ice is gone. And so the erosion rate is tripled, quadrupled probably. And now they have firm plans. They haven't moved yet, but they have firm plans to move to the mainland. But this mainland move for that many people, maybe more than 400, would cost something like $40,000 per person, according to the Corps of Engineers. Permafrost, by the way, 25% of the northern hemisphere has permafrost. Permafrost is defined as soil that is permanently frozen for at least 2 years. That is, during that 2-year span, it remains frozen. And as permafrost melts, it is producing it's releasing carbon dioxide from rotting vegetation. So this is another source of carbon dioxide that can't do much about it. Another problem with permafrost is that as it melts, buildings sink into it. So it's quite a hazard for the Arctic.
Atafu Atoll is in the South Pacific, and a satellite picture was taken on the 2nd of March in 2009 and was the image of the day for NASA's Earth Observatory page. The Southern Pacific Ocean is a territory of New Zealand, and the typical ring shape is the result of coral reefs building up around a volcanic island.
Yeah, and each of these islands, of course, is doomed with any expected sea level rise. But the one I think that is the most worrisome, the country of Maldives has 520,000 people, and 520,000 people, and it and most of the land in the Maldives, and hundreds of islands, and most of the land is 1 to 1.5 meters high. So 520,000 people are going to have to move sometime in the future. Where do you put 520,000 people? The country for a while was decided to try to buy land in India or other countries, but they've given up now, and they say they're going to use seawalls, but seawalls won't work. So then there are many examples of this problem. All these atolls are very, very fragile in terms of sea level rise. These people are going to have to go somewhere, and that's one of the big questions facing us in looking at global climate change.
Bangladesh is another place that is concerned with climate refugees. On the 26th of March, Earth Snapshot, a daily view of the planet on the web, featured the Ganges and Jamuna rivers flowing into the Bay of Bengal. The wide rivers visible to the north below the Himalayas are loaded with sediment and create multiple winding paths on the silk.
The country of Bangladesh is very low, and it has in the past suffered mightily from a lot of storms that flood much of the country. Now, the country has built some 3-story, I guess they call them shelters, that people are expected to go to when a storm is predicted. And apparently it's worked pretty well. That they, how do you get, when a population as thick as Bangladesh, it's hard to imagine how you would get everybody off the flooded areas. So that's it's a unique situation. It might be used elsewhere. Build permanent shelters that are occupied just during storms.
Wow, that's interesting. The Great Barrier Reef in Australia is 104 inches by 45 inches. And my first snorkeling adventure in 2007 was an initiation into underwater photography. And this particular synthesis of that experience was like flying underwater. And it took about 21 photographs and put them together to make this image.
Reefs are in trouble. Everybody knows this. I think it's been given a lot of publicity. They're suffering a double whammy. The heat, the warming ocean, is making the water is killing some reefs around Australia and elsewhere. But there's another problem, and that's ocean acidification. CO2 gets into is absorbed by the ocean, and it combines with carbonate to form H2CO3, which is carbonic acid. And the carbonic acid is killing coral reefs and other forms of life that have calcium carbonate shells or skeletons. It's a serious problem for the future.
The tsunami in the Indian Ocean is 38 inches by 35 inches. And according to the U.S. Geological Survey, the earthquake that triggered the Great Tsunami of 2004 released energy equivalent to 23,000 atomic bombs, as powerful as the one that dropped in Hiroshima.
This type of tsunami is not a product of coastal of climate change. It is caused by the movement of the tectonic plates that make the crust of the earth. But we have lots of smaller tsunamis, sometimes quite damaging on land or on estuaries or lagoons, especially, for example, in Alaska. In Latuva Bay, in Alaska a few years back. One evening, there were three sailboats owned and operated by tourists, and who were just spending the night there. Well, during the night, a small earthquake occurred, and a big landslide slammed into the lagoon. And the reason the landslide occurred is because of the melting of the permafrost and the excess rainfall that had happened there. So the tsunami that was formed apparently reached a height of more than 100 feet. All three boats were blown away, of course. One was never seen again. Another one hit the land. Everybody survived, but the boat was smashed. But the third one had the fascinating experience of going over the spit that was between the ocean and the lagoon. And they could look down and look at the tops. They were on the crest of the tsunami, just a local tsunami, and they could look down at the tops of pine trees. Can you imagine what a kind of a thrill that was?
Well, sounds pretty scary to me, boss. The Yukon Delta in Alaska is 44 inches square. And in southwest Alaska, the waters of the Yukon and the Kuskokwim rivers flow through a vast treeless plain or tundra. Waterfowl, shorebirds, and fish inhabit this remote refuge, and nearly 25,000 Yupik Eskimos who rely on the hunting and fishing for food.
The marshes such as this, these are spectacular marshes, are being lost as sea level rises. They're being formed again as the sea marches into the mainland, but it takes a long time to make a good, healthy marsh like this. So the marshes, which are valuable in many ecosystems, are being slowly destroyed under current circumstances.
I always thought this one looked like an upside down flower. And this was the first one that we did with Google Maps. The rest I read scientific papers, and we would work together to find an image that seemed best to show the science. Inferno is in the exhibit, and it is 2019 that I made it, 35 inches wide, 43 inches tall. And it depicts the Sprague fire in 2017, which burned 16,982 acres in a 2-month period in Glacier National Park. I was the Sperry Chalet artist in residence there, had hiked the park with a 35-pound pack and made 14 oils on location. But this batik helped raise funds for the iconic Sperry Chalet that was severely burned and reopened in 2020, fully restored.
This is another example of so many examples of the damage caused by local fires. One of the problems that we haven't mentioned is air pollution. I think maybe there were many photographs published of New York City, of Manhattan, as Manhattan was getting all the pollution from the smoke from the Canadian fires, and it's really spectacular. And a number of people who already had problems with their lungs were greatly affected by this air pollution. I would like to read something now that was written by Robert Sanford, who is a Canadian water policy expert. And this is at the time of the Canadian fires. The truth is that we have located our agriculture and built our communities and all associated infrastructures in places and to standards appropriate to what we thought was a relatively stable climate conditions upon which we can no longer rely. what should be deeply alarming to all of us is that climate we have taken for granted for so long is right before our very eyes being replaced by a climate that, unless we act now, may not survive. And that's by Robert Sanford. And that's saying the same thing as the UN chief said, that it's happening, but we are not. We are just scratching the surface in terms of reducing greenhouse gases. So we have a major chore for those of us concerned with the environment to work in reducing carbon dioxide. And this again is the cover of the book, Escaping Nature. I did this one I did with two of my children. My oldest son actually was the one who did most of the design of the organization of the book, which I was very, very proud of him for that. But the book is, I think, will be very valuable to people from anywhere, because we talk about the impact of global climate change in all kinds of locations, and what you can do about it, if anything.
You even have bug out bags in it. And you have so much information. It's just a great read. Kind of serious and scary, but a great read. It's well written, Pilkey. And for some reason, there it is. There's the fossil fuel map. And I made this for the book, and the map shows the areas around the world that potentially have the world's oil, gas, and coal deposits based on data from the U.S. Geological Survey, the European Commission, and other government sources. The purple and brown areas represent the oil and gas, while the red shows possible coal deposits. Conservative in methodology, the map indicates the minimum bounds of fossil fuel on our planet. It was developed by Alice McGowan and the Leave It in the Ground initiative, and it showcases the extent of carbon energy sources that must stay in the ground if humanity is to prevent catastrophic climate change.
So how do we survive without oil and gas and coal? Well, that's what we got to work on. This is the first figure in the book, and this is Mary Edna's contribution to the book, which is very important. This should impress you with the amount of evil minerals that are awaiting our drills and mines and so forth.
I think maybe a little discussion about your book. It's illustrated. If we just go to the big picture of me holding up this book, it's illustrated by Charles Pilkey. So, and that's his son, but the graphs and the information, I've never seen anything quite so thorough in my life, Pilkey. And I like the way that it's divided up by chapters, because you're dealing with global climate change in a different way: earth, air, fire, water, and space. It's incredible the amount of information in these pages.
Yeah, and much of this is from the scientific literature. This is not our original research, but it's but I can tell you that, as one who did a lot of the study for that and others, it is so impressive, and we really have a serious problem for the next generation. Just think of all my most fascinating recent event of the global climate change is the use of kayaks in Death Valley in California, the driest area in our country, and that's because of recent rains that occurred there. Earlier, 2 or 3 years earlier, they had the same amount of rain for 1 year in 3 hours in Death Valley.
Wow.
And there's so many statistics like that. 1/3 of Pakistan was covered in water when the Indus River flooded. It's coming here. It's coming here in Ohio and North Carolina. It's coming here. Everybody's going to get their taste of it. There's no question of that. And we should be prepared. Keep gasoline in your car.
Yeah. And tell them what a bug out bag is.
Well, a bug out bag is a bag you should have ready to take with you. You don't want to have, when you hear about a hurricane or a flood coming, you don't want to have to then go to a grocery store and get things you need when you get out of there. You bug out. When you bug out, you better have it all ready to go. And then there's the problem of escape, which is really a problem on the outer banks of North Carolina, where, like many other barrier islands, there's a single road that you'd escape from, and the shoulders are sand. So you have a single road, and you got hundreds of cars trying to get away. And guess what happens? You have flat tires. You run out of gas. You have fender benders that slow things down. It's happened every time there's been an evacuation from some event, and so we all need to be careful and planning for this, and make sure you got gas. Make sure you don't have a flat tire, and so forth.
Yeah, when I was escaping from a hurricane on I-26, I had my 2 daughters, and I had a rabbit and a dog and a cat, I think. And it was only an hour and a half, should have been, to Columbia, but it took us, I think, about 8 hours, and there was no gas station to stop in. There were no places to go to the bathroom. It was bumper to bumper. You had to just turn your car off. It was pretty harrowing knowing that there was a hurricane behind us.
We described, Mary Edna, your adventures on that escape. My parents had the same problem. They retired in Waveland, Mississippi, and they had to. Well, first place, my father sat in the living room and listened to TV, trying to figure out what quadrant of the storm was coming ashore. That was very stupid. He should have gone out now. And when we did get out, when they finally did get out, he recalled seeing a tree fall behind him right across the road. So they barely made it out. They were very lucky. He worked for General Electric on the Saturn test site, and the building there for the Saturn test site was especially strong because it was designed for an exploding, in case a rocket exploded when it wasn't supposed to explode. But so they had five feet of water in their house, and they hadn't moved anything.
Mm.
Instead of watching TV, he should have moved things. So, things like their papers, wills and insurance policies and so forth. Many things, and we have a list of things to do in case of a storm, a hurricane, or whatever. Everybody has some whatevers.
Well, when we did our first book, a lot of Americans did not believe in global climate change at all. And you revealed in the book the different oil companies and their websites pretending to be like they were environmentally kind and generous. And now almost everybody in America has been affected or their family affected by global climate change. Wouldn't you say that's true?
Oh, I think the impact of climate change in the U.S. and everywhere else is very widespread. Everybody has seen or come close to seeing but there's still some people who argue against it. The Wall Street Journal recently had an op-ed about claiming in effect that the alarm about fire and how fast it spread and how many fires there are was really not valid. But ironically, that op-ed came out at the same time as the Canadian fires were going on that eventually covered an area the size of North Carolina. So, and in where I live, I have a friend who believes global climate change is something that's made up by politicians.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that's you have to look. You have to look. Keep your eyes open.
Well, it's been wonderful to work with you all these years, Orrin Pilkey. Today's my birthday. I'll be 72 and you'll be 90 years old in September. And you're still writing another book. You have been such a generous giver to the scientific community. And it's been an honor to be your sidekick.
Well, thank you very much. And of course, I've learned all about art. It's nice to combine art and science. It's kind of unique, and it was a lot of fun and an education at the same time.
Well, it made me do things I never would have thought about doing. It made me, since I read scientific papers that you gave me for every single batik I ever did, and we discussed each piece. I think I've made, about 75 pieces for you now for illustrating our books. And I love learning the information. I love the wiggling around to find the best way to express the science.
Yeah, the best way to impress people who are skeptical or even for those who are anxious to be educated. Yeah, with the art there's a whole new bunch of people who pay attention, who learn from it, who wouldn't have learned without that art, I think. So that's why it's important.
Well, it's such a difficult situation that we're dealing with, and the art is beautiful and allows people to enter into the science because the art makes you emotional. It makes you emotionally involved. And then you want to know, why is this important? Why is this piece of land being shown?
Yeah, I agree. I would also say it's been an honor for me to be working with you for all these years. Remember, we first met on a boat going over the Shackelford Banks in North Carolina, a boat from the Duke Marine Lab.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked for the first time, I think, then. It's worked out.
Hands that we would write a book together, do a book, a celebration of the world's barrier islands with Columbia University Press. And that book took us 10 years to produce, but we found 2,200 barrier islands, I think, as a result of it. It was really fun.
Yeah, we have, that's what we learned. The U.S. has far more barrier islands than any other country. And that's why we have more problems with barrier islands. They are dynamic. It's only since the 1970s that we realized they're actually migrating. They're actually, as the sea
Mhm.
level rises, the islands are moving inland. And of course, when it moves inland, that's called beach erosion.
Yeah. Yeah, and right now they're trying to shore up these islands and still build on them 50 houses that shift with storms. It's pretty incredible how it seems to me that the economics sort of try to erase the reality of what is happening on our climate
Yeah.
because people want to make money and you think people should be moving from the coast.
Yes, in fact, that's what my new book is about. That I have with three co-authors. It's called "It's Your Turn to Move." That's
What a great title!
the book, and the concern is, um, well, I mentioned one thing. What are the Maldives going to do with 50 some thousand people on islands that are not much higher than this? And there's nowhere for them to go. Well, there's going to have to be somewhere, but that's a problem for future generations to determine. But a lot of communities are being moved in Washington State along the Olympic Peninsula shoreline on the western part of the state. They're moving up buildings, whole village, small villages, moving out of danger from the sea, where and to get away from an eroding shoreline. Oh, and Shishmaref, we mentioned the Eskimos. They're planning a move in some detail. They're being quite sophisticated about it. And Siberia, they have barrier islands and they have problems, and they're moving communities. Um,
I was in a think tank in Atlanta, and Atlanta is actually preparing now for climate refugees. They're adding schools, roads, and housing because they're inland, kind of safe, and they've already got a lot of refugees coming their way. So that's pretty smart planning ahead. It's
that's good.
yeah,
You
it
know,
is.
we list places, we list cities, we list states, we list um, also countries
Mm,
that are the best havens if you're fleeing global climate change. If you're living in South Florida, you're going to be you or your descendants are going to be refugees. They're thinking now that it'll be something of the order of 4 million people from South Florida will be moving north and up. And if you're moving north, you want to move above the latitude of about 45 degrees.
wow.
Um,
When is
and
that expected? Because it's limestone and the water's going into the limestone, correct? The
uh,
Florida is limestone.
yeah, well, the problem for Miami, they have porous limestone underneath the city, and so the water is going up, coming up from below. How do you stop? How do you stop that? Miami, I think, is a city that will not exist um, in another 50 years or something like that. Uh,
Yeah.
there are other cities with something like that too. Um, it's an exciting future.
Yeah. Hey, Molly.
I wanted to pop on because that I mean, this gives me all kinds of feels that I don't necessarily love
Yes.
very much, but it really does sort of ignite a little warming
Yeah.
this particular globe, that's for sure.
Yeah.
This is all it's a little distressing. I mean, oh, I have some questions to ask from our viewers, but I think the primary question for me, like, what do you think needs to happen before we sort of sit up and take notes and actually make some changes that are going to move our needle here, because it feels like we're very behind the game here. We have not curbed our enthusiasm for consumption and excess. And what do you think is going to be sort of the straw that sort of breaks the camel's back, as we say? What might it take?
Well, I didn't quite understand that question.
Like, what kind of natural disaster? I mean, do you really think that Miami has to fall off the face of the earth, essentially, before we sort of sit up and say, okay, well,
Yeah,
maybe we need to think about how we conduct ourselves and our consumerism
yeah.
and the way we
Well, the
use
city,
our resources.
the city of Bangkok may offer, in Asia may offer an example of a problem. They have many beautiful temples and beautiful buildings there, they say. And so we are not going to worry about sea level rise. And we're going to build maybe a seawall, but it's a big city. It's not really, they've just simply said, our city is too beautiful to worry about something like sea level rise. And it's an amazing attitude that I think it's in other people can't think. Why would we've been living here? My family's been, why are we going to leave for something like this? And we can build seawall, but of course seawall often don't work, and they're very costly. And so it's different. In this book, we talk about different. In this coming book, we talk about different attitudes in different places. Shismareff, the Arctic, said they immediately took took to moving. They didn't hesitate, and they haven't moved yet, but they're doing the right thing, the right planning. But there are a number of countries. Singapore ain't gonna move, but they have a lot of extra sand. But how long is that gonna work? And we go through all kinds of examples of this. The Outer Banks of North Carolina, they're not going to move. They're going to move. Individuals who want to spend money and move their building are doing it, but communities are not moving. So
I think it's going to take for individuals like you're in Tornado Alley, for people to realize the increase in their own neighborhood. Like we're 45 floods a year here, but probably in my lifetime, we will flood more than half the year, even more. My city has to do something.
Right. And you mentioned Tornado Alley, as a young person, Tornado Alley was like Kansas,
Right.
Oklahoma. It's not Kansas or Oklahoma anymore.
Right.
It's like the Ohio Valley, that this sort of like, western portion of Kentucky and Tennessee, it's all shifting
Yeah.
upward. And I'm only 43. I feel like there's hardly enough time in my life for it to have shifted to such a degree that we're talking about different quadrants of the country now, and that's a frightening thing.
I think that what people can do is be involved in their local environmental groups, and groups like NRDC, the Environmental Defense Fund, Sierra Club. All of those have huge political wheels that try to fight for climate change to be part of our political discourse.
recognize, yeah.
Yeah, so I think we have to become environmentally involved locally and and then beyond too, if you want to. Right now there are so many places that need our help.
And that's where it grows. You have to start small sometimes.
Yes,
Scratch
I like
one corner.
the local. I like the drop in the water and watching it grow out.
Yes, exactly. And I think people need to feel inspired to do that. I think a lot of people sort of discount what one drop does, but one drop changes the whole pool. So, you know, yeah, absolutely. Okay, before we wrap, I do have just a couple questions. I have one question for each of you, and these come from Amy. So, Dr. Pilkey, as warming continues and we face sort of a confluence of melting ice along with melting permafrost, can you talk about the consequences of the water of the Atlantic and the Pacific mixing with the Arctic, as well as like the southern, as as near as the southern pole?
Well, the one thing that's talking about mixing, the Gulf Stream, we have comes up from Florida all the way up into basically into Canada. Well, no, but eventually it turns like this and goes into Europe, and the Gulf Stream is warm water, and when it gets to Europe, it is responsible for much of the warm temperatures in Europe, but it has to go be just below Greenland as it's on its way to Europe, and now Greenland is melting so fast that the cold water is coming out and blocking the Gulf Stream. And there's fear, if this really happens, that Europe is going to suddenly be much cooler, much colder than it is now, just because of the change of the Gulf Stream. There's a lot of stories like that. The ocean circulation is changing, and so often we depend on the ocean for our climate, or the climate is related to the ocean nearby, and so forth. So that's a big event. What's coming? If this happens in Europe, it's going to be a real serious problem for them.
Thank you for that. I had a feeling you were going to say something like that. And one for you, Mary Edna. Can you tell us a little bit about how your art has impacted people's knowledge of climate change? Has it helped some people sort of overcome this sort of inclination to consider climate change as something produced by a politician or just part of a rhetoric for someone else's agenda? Can you tell us how your work has sort of helped move a needle?
I think so. I've had over 100 exhibitions, one-woman exhibitions, and most of those are with Orrin, and they're educational, and I think that people, when they read and see and learn, and especially if they're children, teenagers, college students, most of our exhibitions are in college museums of art, just like yours. And I think that putting the art and the science together, especially in the honors colleges, helps the young people digest and move into the fields that we're in to help move environmental art and science forward. So I do think it's happening.
I think that's a really good thing, and I encourage you to keep on keeping on, because I unfortunately we've made it the responsibility of our young people to maybe find some creative solutions out of this mess we're in. So I think everything we can do to motivate and draw smart young thinkers to sort of pick this up and run with it, I would say that's all the better.
And I always encourage the elders to donate money to those environmental groups, because they may not be able to physically go out and, do something, but they have the means to help fund the groups that do so much for us.
Absolutely.
May I suggest that one of those groups is surf riders, in terms of ocean quality and beach quality.
Surf riders.
They're marvelous. group, and they work in the lakes too, the Lake Michigan Lake. And so,
Ooh, I didn't even know about them, Pilkey.
Writers. Well, we all learned something new today.
Yeah, I learned a lot.
Well, thank you to the both of you. This was both such a joy, a little bit of a buzzkill just because of the heavy subject matter.
It is.
But really, this has been so informative and educational. And I think to see the proof in the pudding is always a little jarring. To see it come to life through your art, Mary Edna, I think is really important. Pairing the two, making sure there's a real connection between how it looks and what it
Yes.
is very, very important. So thank you both for the work that you're doing out in the world and in your local communities to, really make some big changes with, small to big actions. So we appreciate you. Anyone who holds this dear as a priority appreciates you. Thank you for joining us. This has been such a wonderful treat on your birthday, no less, Mary Edna. Yes. Happy birthday to you. So thank you to you both. Again, this has been a wonderful presentation and a great resource. Orrin, real quickly, do you want to tell us where we can find your book?
you what?
Where can we find your book? It's on Amazon, I believe.
It's in the market now as of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So local booksellers, you can also find it. We hope you'll go out and bone up on your knowledge.
But you can find from Amazon or from several.
Any local bookseller.
Any local bookstore too. Okay, Escaping Nature.
Yeah, it's a great book.
It should be in local bookstores, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Hey, it's been an honor, by the way, to be invited to do this.
Yes, it has been. We have never done what we did today before.
Well, it's been an honor to be here with you, and I'm so pleased. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Jason, whom I'm going to bring back on really quickly, for bringing Dr. Pilkey and Mary Edna to us. What a gift it has been. Just a reminder that you can find a recording of this webinar later today on our website, and you can see, of course, this one and all of our other webinar presentations at alumlc.org/MiamiOH. Thank you all for joining us. Love and honor, and take care of your planet, folks. Have a great day.
Thanks, Molly.
Thanks.
Thank you, Orrin, Mary Edna. This is